Welcome back everybody, my name is Tucker, and today's video is another episode in the Trade Rewind series. Now, if you don't know what this is a series in which I look back at some of the biggest trades in NBA history and look at how it impacted those teams then, as well as how all those pieces kind of ended up now in 2019, where they ended up going, how they ended up moving around the league, and then how they impact the league now, like I said, in 2019. And I went to the community tab on the channel and I asked you guys for some suggestions on which trade you would like to see, and overwhelmingly you guys suggested the 2008 Pau Gasol trade to the LA Lakers. So let's look at the trade at the time. February 1st, 2008, Pau Gasol was traded by the Memphis Grizzlies with a 2010 second round pick that ended up becoming Devin Ebanks to the LA Lakers for Kwame Brown, Javaris Crittenton, Marc Gasol, Aaron McKie, a 2008 first round pick that later became Dante Green, and a 2010 first round pick that later became Greivis Vasquez. And many people at the time thought this was entirely one-sided in the Lakers' favor. They were a team that had some good pieces. Obviously, they had Kobe Bryant at the time. They had Lamar Odom. Andrew Bynum was beginning to come into his own as well. And this was seen as kind of the last piece that they needed to be true championship contenders. And it just really didn't seem like they gave up very much at all for a player of Pau Gasol's caliber, who at the time was one of the franchise leaders in a couple of major statistical categories for the Memphis Grizzlies and was still relatively young. It was a big piece for them, leading to a lot of media reaction about how little the Grizzlies got back in return. But the interesting thing about this deal isn't just how all the pieces ended up, where all these pieces are now in 2019, how it affects the league today, even though there are some interesting parts to that. It's more so how overwhelmingly people thought the Lakers won this deal, when in reality it ended up being a pretty big win-win for both sides, despite what seemed like a meager return at first for the Grizzlies. So let's go ahead and break down the pieces here for the Lakers. And of course, we're going to begin with Pau Gasol, who was a gigantic part of their team across the 7 seasons that he played in LA. He averaged around 18 and 10 across those 7 seasons, and they went to the finals 3 consecutive seasons, beginning immediately with the year that he was traded mid-season in 2008. They went to the finals in 08 and lost, and then won the finals in 2009 and 2010. And really, once he got to LA, Gasol's reputation kind of changed around the league. Before he got there, he was seen as maybe a bit more of a softer international player, whether that's a stereotype that we still feed into or not. At the time, it was still very much the case where people thought that Gasol was soft, but he ended up being one of the more consistent performers on those Lakers teams throughout his tenure during the 3-year stretch that they were in the finals or across any of his 7 seasons. Because in that 3-year stretch, Andrew Bynum was pretty healthy and was a big part of those teams and really helped the Lakers win those back-to-back titles. But the more that era went on, the more he struggled with injuries and the more Gasol had to step up. And that consistency and longevity ended up being one of the bigger takeaways of his Lakers tenure, stepping up in place of guys like Bynum when they got hurt. And not only that, but during that 3-year stretch of finals trips back-to-back years, Gasol was the second leading scorer for those teams every year. So it wasn't just his consistency, wasn't just his longevity, wasn't just his durability, but it was also his productivity that made him so important to those Lakers teams and helped them win those 2 championships. And it's pretty doubtful that they would end up winning either of the 2 championships that they did or be nearly as successful if they didn't make this move, because again, Gasol just continually stepped up and was a huge scorer for them. And even if they had kept Marc Gasol, which we're going to talk about later, even if they had kept him, obviously he ended up becoming a very good player in his own right. He didn't end up coming to the league until the 2009-2010 season, and even then just wasn't as effective of a player as his brother until much later in Pau's career. So again, it's really doubtful that they would end up winning those championships without making this kind of move and really not giving up all that much at the time, with the exception of, again, how Marc Gasol's career would end up, which nobody really saw coming. And then the only other piece to talk about here for the Lakers in this trade was they also got a 2010 second round pick that they ended up using on Devin Ebanks, who was later waived and amounted to nothing down the road for them. Moving on now, let's talk about some of the pieces for the Memphis Grizzlies and what they ended up becoming, and it's pretty simple. Kwame Brown, Javaris Crittenton, and Aaron McKie and Dante Green were later either traded, waived, or left in free agency for nothing and really didn't help the Grizzlies at all down the road of this trade. However, Greivis Vasquez, even though he wasn't anything all that significant for the team, he was later traded for Quincy Pondexter, who was a part of the 2015 trade that landed the Grizzlies Jeff Green, but is also the reason that they owe the Celtics their first-round pick in 2020, top 6 protected, or 2021. So maybe not anything hugely significant in terms of either Vasquez or Pondexter or even Green's impact on the Grizzlies, but more so just an interesting little tidbit about how that trade is still affecting them now in 2019 and could be affecting them for the next 2 years. Which of course brings us to the heart of this deal and what the Grizzlies ended up getting out of this deal, primarily Marc Gasol, Pau's brother, who ended up becoming the franchise's all-time leader in minutes, field goals, rebounds, and blocks, and is second in minutes played and points to Mike Conley. And this surprised a lot of people because Marc Gasol was drafted 48th in the 2007 draft, didn't end up coming over to the league until the 2008-2009 season, was a pretty immediate impact, or had a pretty immediate impact on the Grizzlies, and was one of their most impactful players across his career with the team. And again, this was really the only reason that this trade wasn't entirely one-sided. If Marc Gasol didn't turn out to be the player that he did or anything significant at all, then this trade would have basically been the Grizzlies got nothing and the Lakers got a piece of a 2-time championship era team. Now, as we know now, at the trade deadline this year, Gasol was then traded for Jonas Valanciunas, DeLon Wright, CJ Miles, and a 2024 second-round pick, and then Wright was later traded this offseason to the Mavericks for 2 second-round picks, which makes the 2019 version of this trade the Lakers getting nothing player-wise, but obviously they did get 2 championships out of the deal initially, while the Grizzlies got Jonas Valanciunas and 3 future second-round picks. So from a long-term perspective, the Grizzlies, I guess you could say, won this trade because they are still reaping the benefits of it as a result of trading Marc Gasol a little bit later down the road, whereas the Lakers didn't end up doing that, and they did not end up trading him, and he just ended up leaving in free agency. So at least they have Valanciunas and those 3 future second-round picks to show immediately from this trade all the way back in 2008 when they got Marc Gasol. But in a shorter-term perspective, the Lakers obviously won it as well because they ended up winning 2 championships back-to-back, made the finals 3 years in a row, and were one of the more successful teams of that era when Gasol was there, at least in his early years with the team. So this is a very rare, historical, looking back in the NBA, win-win situation, a win-win trade for both teams, even though, again, initially, it did not seem like that would be the case at all. And in the end, this is just such a crazy scenario where our opinion and our perception of this deal and how it looked ended up changing so much across the 10 years or so after it ended up being made, because like I said, Gasol ended up being such a successful, both Gasols ended up being such successful players for both the Lakers and the Grizzlies. Obviously, they're brothers that were traded for each other, and both of them rank in the top 5 in a lot of significant statistical categories in Memphis Grizzlies history, and the Lakers ended up winning championships. And it's very rare to see moves like this that you can look back on and say, this team would not have won a championship, even though their team was very good. They probably wouldn't have won a championship without making this deal specifically, and then end up actually being so successful as they were. 2 championships in 3 years, 3 consecutive trips to the finals, and obviously they had other pieces like Lamar Odom, like I said, Andrew Bynum, Kobe Bryant, but it's really doubtful that they would end up winning those championships without Pau Gasol. And on the other hand, even though the Grizzlies ended up giving up the better of the Gasol brothers, if you want to look at it long term, I think it's pretty clear that Pau Gasol was still the better brother. They did pretty well considering the circumstances and considering that they did end up giving up Pau Gasol to get someone that is top 2 in pretty much every major statistical category that would be relevant for a big man in franchise history. And so this is just a lesson for a lot of us to maybe not judge trades so harshly initially. This has happened a couple of different times, whether it be the DeMarcus Cousins trade when he was initially traded from the Kings to the Pelicans, or the Paul George trade where he was traded from Indiana to Oklahoma City. Things can change pretty quickly, or even on a bit more of a long-term basis over 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years, as we saw in this case. So we don't always initially know how a trade is going to work out, how one-sided it may end up seeming at the time might not actually end up being the case. So this is just another reminder of that. And there you have it. That is going to be the end of today's video, and I thank you all very much for watching. Once again, my name is Tucker. If you missed any of my previous videos, then be sure to check out the boxes on screen. If you guys have other suggestions for this series, other NBA trade rewinds that you would like to see, then obviously leave those down in the comment section below, and I will be sure to take a look. But once again, my name is Tucker. Hope you guys enjoyed, and I will see you all next time.